All right, guys, welcome back to Driver's Therapy. Today, we're going to be talking about police or law enforcement and car enthusiasts, either them being car enthusiasts or pulling us over and they're car enthusiasts. So that's kind of a mouthful. But essentially, we're going to be talking about 3 of my experiences that I had with police and being a car enthusiast. And if you scroll through TikTok, I don't know why, but they show me a lot of videos of like supercars being pulled over and there's different interactions. But I want to share with you my experiences, and I want to go ahead and say it right away. I am prior military, so I got a lot of love for law enforcement. I got a lot of love for police. They have a hard job and they keep us safe. And there's many times I've called them, so. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and kick it off. All right, we're gonna start off with a positive one. All right, so this was when I had my R33 Skyline, and this was, oh my gosh, like 12, 14 years ago or something like that. And I was on my way to Atlanta, Georgia from North Carolina, I believe. Yeah, from North Carolina. Or Tennessee, one of those. Anyways, it was a long drive, and I was on my way to go see DJ Tiesto live in Atlanta, Georgia. So I was like extremely pumped up, and I was driving. So I went there, had a great time in the concert, woke up the next day, and was heading back home. So as I was driving, you know, I'm in the right-hand side, I'm in my Skyline, it's all decked out, it looked pretty cool. And all of a sudden, because I am always aware of my surroundings, being prior military, that's something that they teach you a lot, you know, in the military, is to always be aware of your situation, also known as situational awareness, and to pay attention to detail. And that they're always pounding that in you. So as a soldier or as a veteran, that you're always thinking like that. So I'm always driving, and even now I'm always aware of all my surroundings. And I look over, and there's literally like a 20, I don't know at the time, like 15, or I'm like a 2012 or 13, I don't know. But one of those newer body style Mustangs of the time, and the ones that had 5.0 written on them. I know they probably had 5.0 written across the time. But this one was black. It was black, and the windshield was black, so you couldn't even see, like everything about it was black. And I was doing the speed limit, and this was in South Carolina. And I'm doing the speed limit, and this guy's behind me, and he's kind of telling me, so like, I'm like, so, you know, I go to the left lane, I go to the right lane, and he's just sticking with me. And I'm like, I'm not gonna race this guy because I just got a weird vibe about it. And about 30 seconds later, no lie, like, all of a sudden, this car just lights up like crazy. And I'm like, what the hell? And I'm like, whoa. I had a feeling this was an undercover cop, but this was my first time running into one of those specialty cop cars, you know, like the specialty fast, like, you know, Chargers or Hellcat or whatever. But this thing was like decked out. So I pull over, and the guy comes over, and, you know, he's like, I see you're not from here. And I'm like, no. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm heading back from Atlanta. I just went to a DJ Tiesto concert, and I'm going back. I'm active duty, and I have to go back to base. And he's like, so you're a soldier? And I'm like, yes, sir. And of course, no one's gonna admit this, but I will. You always bring that up when you're in the Army, because the police officers and the soldiers were kind of the same thing, just a different, you know, cut of cloth or whatever you call it. I'm not good with analogies or stuff like that. But anyways, we do the same thing. We serve and we protect. And essentially the guy was like, you know, he was like, okay. And then he says, do you mind stepping out the vehicle? And I was like, okay, sure. So we step out the vehicle, and he's like, let's go to the right side. You know, we don't want to get hit by someone because we're on a highway. And he is just asking me random questions like, so is Tiesto like a rave guy? And he's just walking around my Skyline, just walking slowly, looking at things and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, so does that mean that you have some drugs on you? I'm like, no. He's like, well, don't ravers do drugs? I'm like, no. He's like, you wouldn't mind if I checked out looked inside your car? And I was like, I don't care. He's like, and he looks around, he looks at me, he's looking at my Skyline. And then he looks in the car. He doesn't even open anything up. And he's like, all right. And he's like, what is this? And I'm like, it's a Nissan Skyline. He's like, He's like, okay. And while he's looking at my car, I look at his like 50 Mustang, and it is decked out. And I'm like, but you can't see inside his windows, so it's like super dark tint. And then he looks at me, he's like, are you sure you don't have any drugs? I'm like, no, I don't have drugs. I'm just going back. And he's like, all right, you're free to go. And I'm just like, what the hell happened? And then I just realized this guy just spent like 90% of the time just looking at my car. And I think he just pulled me over just to look at it. Now, it was a little freaky because he wasn't super nice about it. He wasn't like, oh my gosh, asking me questions. He was just kind of looking at it. And then when he didn't find anything else to talk about, he was like, all right, you're good to go. So that was one story that I still remember because it was kind of odd. So yeah, so we're gonna go to a bad experience and then we're gonna go to a good experience. All right, so one of the worst experiences I've had being pulled over was, I was like 17, 18, and I had a souped up car. I think it was like some Honda, and it was all decked out. But I remember I got pulled over by this guy, and he must have hated like anything like modified, or, you know, I know that at the time it was kind of like a beat up Honda type of car, but at the same time, like, he definitely wasn't a fan of anything that sounded loud. So he pulled me over. He's like, you were speeding, and give me your license. And then he comes back. This is crazy. And he just takes his time looking at the whole car, and he has like measurements and stuff like that. And he's like, I want you to turn on your blinkers. I want you to turn on this. And at the point in time, I think I had something wrong with my blinkers. It was going too fast. But the guy gave me like 9 or 10 tickets. It was crazy. It was just like, car's too low, blinkers too fast, exhaust has been cut off, just all kinds of crazy stuff about license plate like crooked. I was like, or something like that. And and I also had another issue with license plate not visible. I just had kind of like a border of it, but you could still read the signs. And it was crazy. It's like tint. I mean, it was like 9 or 10 tickets. And I remember when I went to the courthouse, the judge is like, you must have pissed him off. And I was like, no. And the judge was nice, and he took off a lot of that stuff off and left me with the speeding. But I remember that guy was just like, I do not like anything that's loud, anything that's like that, and I'm gonna just light you up. So I remember that was like one of those times. But then my other experience was completely opposite. It was actually the most recent time I've ever been pulled over, and I think it was last year or the year before that. I was driving through Colorado, a small town in Colorado. And it's one of those small towns that it goes from like 50 down to 25 and then back to 50. And if you go 30 on a 25, or if you go 35 on a 30, they're lighting you up. And I was driving, and I was in the NSX, and you know, I think I'm doing like 40 or 45 in a 30, and I passed a cop, and you know, I'm just talking, I'm not really thinking. I passed the cop, and like we make eye contact. It was almost like a lost connection. I was like, oh no, we made eye contact. And I looked down, and I was like 45. I was like, oh man. So I immediately, not like a few seconds later, I immediately just pulled over, put on my hazards. And the moment that I pulled over, put my hazards, he was already behind me. And he walks up, and I'm like, oh. And I was like, he's like, you know what, I pulled you over? And I was like, yes, sir, I was totally speeding. I got it stuck in conversation, but I don't like to make excuses. I was speeding. That was my fault. And he looks over at the car, and he looks at me, and he says, it would be hard to stay in the speed limit with one of these. And I'd be like, yeah, it is. And he's like, that's a nice car. And I was like, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And then he went back, and then he came over, and he's like, look, I understand, he said, and just try to keep it down for me, okay? I'm going to give you a warning. You don't got anything on your record or anything like that. Just keep it down for me, and I appreciate that. And then he gave me his card, and I was just like, thank you so much. Like, I appreciate it. And then that just reminded me why I support law enforcement, because they're just, you know, some of those guys are just wholesome. And we got on the road, and I was like, man, I'm going to keep, you know, right after you get pulled over, you're like, I'll follow every law. But that was a great experience. But essentially, I mean, as far as modified cars goes, I think a lot of them appreciate it. I know recently State Trooper looked at my GT4, and he was like, that thing must really go fast. I'm like, yes, sir. He's like, I bet it's fun. He's like, yes, sir. So I really think that they love cars, and a lot of times, if you're respectful, I think they kind of understand that if you're not doing something super stupid, you know, it's kind of the nature of a fast car. Just try to keep it down and try to respect them. Somebody once gave me the best advice ever, and he was a law enforcement guy, and he says, a break for a break. And what he was meaning is that if you're speeding and you see a cop, you better hit the brakes. Well, make sure nobody's right behind you. You don't want to get rear-ended. But he says if you hit the brakes and he sees that front end do a little bit of a nosedive, he considers that like a respect thing, because he's like, all right, you recognize you're speeding, you see me, you're gonna brake. But if most of the time, if you see a cop and you fly by them, he's gonna pull you over, because you know that was like a double thing for him. Well, all right, guys, I hope that tip is gonna help you guys out later. If so, buy me a cup of coffee by hitting the thanks button. No, joking. All right, guys, you take care, and we will see you soon.